Okay, and we are having people come in. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce's Navigating Tariffs, Strategies for Business Resilience and Profit Protection. We're just going to wait a few minutes while everybody's coming in. Give it another minute. I still see some participants in the waiting room. Okay, so without further ado, um, my name is Victoria Verderam, and I am the Director of Communications and Public Policy here at the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to join us for our Lunch and Learn series on navigating tariffs, strategies for business resilience and profit protection. I'm sure we've all been keeping track of the news, especially if you own or are part of a business. And are wondering how tariffs might affect your business, your bottom line, what you can do. So I'm pleased to share that we have Bing Carbone here with us, president of Modern Plastics. He's going to talk about business resilience and the pivots that he did during COVID. And we also have Jennifer Clement here from CLA, and she is going to be talking to us about tariff mitigation strategies. So some practical and hands-on things that you can do to try to mitigate the effects of tariffs. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Bing, who's going to start us off.
First of all, everyone, thank you for giving up your lunch perhaps today and for the chamber to invite me today. I'm going to set my timer because I'm a stickler about not over talking. So anyhow, here's how I want to start. First of all, I really don't like the word pivot in terms of what we did. I think the real word to use is adapted because when you adapt, I mean, you think quickly to solve a problem, and then you adapt to solve the problem. So think about it first, and then you move forward very quickly. So that's what we did. So I'm going to talk to you about what we did back in 2022 with COVID. So my parent company, we have these forecast meetings in Orlando every year, and it was in December where this meeting was. And before I got on the plane, I heard about this virus going around. I think it started in Oregon or California, and I didn't hear much about it. But by the time I got to the forecast meeting, I heard a bit more about it. Actually spent a half a day at Disney World. Nobody's wearing masks. But by the time I got back to Shelton, it was rather full blown. And I remember our CEO, about 113 business units that we have in North America, and we had a call, and the CEO was basically saying to all the business unit managers that you better get ready to figure out your game plan because in his opinion the business was going to come pretty much to a halt. Talk about your game plan in terms of furloughs and how you basically are going to end up closing the business or perhaps work remote. And I remember we went through that process, and I was like the last guy in the shipping department, left at the company. But I wasn't having any of it. I just kind of said, China had stopped the PPE products from coming in, and one of them being plastic face shields. So I had a manager that I work with in Ohio. His name was Roger, and I had come to work on a Sunday. And I'm sitting here at my desk and saying, what is it that we can do? How do I adapt the business very, very, very quickly? And one of the things I had called Roger about, and this was about 1:30 on a Sunday, I said, Roger, we're in the plastics business. And we know how to manufacture things. We make parts, we fabricate parts. I said, what if we were able to make the plastic face shields? because this is one of the major products that China had basically cut off sending the United States. So Roger sat there quiet for a minute and he said, "You know what? He said, that's a good idea. I think we can do that." So I'm pretty good at marketing. So he said, "Tell you what, you take care of the marketing end, and I'll take care of rounding up materials because we felt we are going to need a lot of materials." So Roger basically broke every protocol and standard practice instruction of our company, started using his American Express card. I mean, just to buy truckloads of material and bring it in before we even had an order. Never mind that, we didn't even have a design for what the face mask should be. We didn't know size, thickness, materials. We didn't even know where we were going to get some of the materials from. But we figured it out pretty quickly. And here's what happened. So at 2 o'clock on that Sunday, I was like, okay, let's just make a post. And I did a post on my personal Facebook page. And I just basically said, hey, Modern Plastics, we're going into the face shield business. We're going to start manufacturing these. And I included my cell number. And it went viral. We had 60,000 shares, I did, on my Facebook page, in probably less than 45 minutes. You can imagine what started happening. My cell phone just went haywire. And one of the first calls I picked up, believe it or not, just by happenstance, was the state of Connecticut. So the state of Connecticut buyer had said, "Oh, okay, so you're making these. We need a lot of them." And I said, "Well, what's a lot?" She goes, "We'd like to start with 1 million plastic face shields." Now, keep in mind, we hadn't made a single plastic face shield. Um, so 1 million face shields, I think it was like $3 or $4 million, because we had to start at a price. We really didn't know where to start the pricing. We knew that there's going to be a lot of overhead. We had to hire people. We had to figure out how we're going to manufacture them. There was just going to be a lot of costs in the beginning, so we just put a price tag on it, and off we went. Um, so what happened after that is we started getting orders from all over the country. I remember the state of Maryland was about the third or fourth call, and I just took on the responsibility of taking these calls and these orders and just kind of handing them over to our sales department to enter them. So now we had set up the manufacturing process, um, and we did it. We talked about it on Thursday morning. We rounded up all the materials. We made what we had to make by hand in terms of tables and manufacturing, materials. And Friday, I found a building in Derby, Connecticut that was empty. So I asked the owner, I said, "Look, we need it. Can we get a month-to-month lease?" Because I had no idea how long, this thing was going to continue. And he said, "Yeah." So on that Friday, we set up a manufacturing business separate from Modern Plastics because we didn't have the room here to do that. And Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning, we were up and running. You can imagine, I heard about 50 to 60 people. I don't know who they were. I don't know if they were criminals. I don't know. We never did background checks. I was just hiring people as fast as I could. And keep in mind, this is COVID. Okay, so we basically have these workstations 10 feet apart from each other. So every day I'd get a report, how many people do we have out from COVID? Some days it's 8, sometimes it would be 15, and I'm still continuing to hire throughout the entire time. I think we got up probably to about 100 people. So we're manufacturing away and we're trying to figure out how to scale up. We started with 50,000 a day. How do we get to 100? How do we get to 250,000 a day? And we did it. It was exhausting, but the country was in trouble. We felt what we were doing was a just cause, and we worked like hell to do it. So as we were manufacturing these products, other things were needed, a lot in plastics. So you all went around, you saw the acrylic barriers that would be putting up. We probably created 8 or 9 other COVID protection products. Um, and we actually started doing parts for the ventilators. And if you remember the ventilators, if you got on one of those things, you were nearing the end of your life pretty much. Um, but we were selling those ventilator parts all over the world, actually. I remember we were, I got a call from one of the folks in our parent company who said, "Hey, I got another product for you to sell, plastic." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" He goes, "Plastic body bags." And I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I know they were needed, but I'm not going to do it." And, people forget how bad it was. There was one point in New York City, there were 300 people dying a day in refrigerated trucks. There was an island off of the coast of Bronx where mass burials were taking place. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, um, but it was bad. So I ended up putting a bed in my office because we were running 3 shifts at that time. So I basically camped out here for a good part of that year. And I was really starting to think about how much money we were making and how much profit that we were making. And by the way, I'll just give an example. For example, let's just say the state of Connecticut or any other um, states, and it was all over the country. Every time they placed a purchase order, every single time, and I had the governor in here, I said, go look at your purchase orders, because the state of Connecticut must have placed 7 or 8 or 9 orders during that time. I said, every purchase order, the price has gone down. Every single one. And you heard about the gouging that was going on and all that kind of stuff. But as we figured out our costs and materials and how fast we can produce them, we lowered our costs. And we might have started at $8 or $9. I think by the end of the year, we were selling them for 65, 70 cents. And that's where it got to. So again, I'm starting to get this anxiety about, the amount of money that we're making. And one of the things that happened is, I started getting these calls from doctors and healthcare workers and presidents of these hospitals, and they would leave the voicemails on my phone, and I still have those voicemails, and they were literally crying, thanking us for what we were doing. I still get, choked up by it. Um, and then we had senators who called me and said, "We'd like to come into your company." Because I had this guild going on. And we like you to round up all the employees and we want to talk to them. So they came into our warehouse under the big American flag and they rounded everybody and they said, "Listen, what you guys are doing here is patriotic. You are saving lives." And that's what these folks that left me these voicemails and emails were saying as well. So when I put it into that context, I started to get it and say, okay, yeah, let's do this. Let's continue on. And so that's what we did. We ended up making 50 million face shields. And let me tell you something, there's no machine to do this. I mean, we were looking at automated machines towards the end of the year, but here's how it was. Can you see this? Can you all see that pretty much? Okay, so this is a plastic face shield that we were doing. We had to figure out how to get the foam that was non-allergic. We had a plastic that was FDA approved. It was thick because the ones from China, they're like saran wrap. We had to figure out where to get the strap materials. And these rivets were put together by hand. This was all cut by hand machines. But anyhow, it was a hell of a project, that we went through. At the end of the year, we kept making these products and the orders just expanded everywhere. And we started doing international business as well. Um, the presidents of the hospitals here in Connecticut, along with their global supply chain managers, their buyers, all those people that were responsible for getting those PPE products in their hospitals. This was about November. And they said, "Hey, listen, we are so grateful for what you companies did." And there were 2 other companies. One was making I think it was the N95 face mask, the actual face mask. And then the other was doing, the gowns and everything else for the hospital. So we're the three companies, and the other two were on the same call. A couple of senators were on the call as well. Um, and what they had said is, we decided collectively as a group, we're going to stay with these Connecticut companies, and we're going to allocate 35% of our business to Connecticut companies, because at that time, things had kind of cleared up a little bit relative to China, and they started shipping product back in. But the state of Connecticut officials and presidents, like I just said, um, we're going to give you 35% of the business. So, okay, that was in November. Um, we waited because the orders had kind of stopped. We waited, and by December 31st, I had to make the decision to scuttle the business because no orders were coming through. And unfortunately, everything that they said, I don't want to call it a lie, but it never happened. It never happened. And what started to happen is that, again, I got down to 75 cents for this plastic face shield. And China came in about 12 cents. And I couldn't do them for that price. I just couldn't. Again, the materials and the product that China was making, it wasn't FDA approved. As I said, the plastic was as thin as saran wrap, and they were smaller. So I had to lay off 110 people, basically December 30th. So that was a lovely post-Christmas gift. People were upset, and it's a very, very hard thing to do. And we were, like I said, a month-to-month lease. And I told the gentleman who owned the building, I said, we're going to pull our materials out of here. And so we exited the business. But when you think about resilience, when you think about, I'm not going to allow this to happen to our business. We're not going to shut the doors. We're going to think about this. We're going to figure out. I've got two signs here. And pardon me on the first one. The first sign says, get shit done. And that's what we do. And that's the way I think. Because you can talk and talk and talk, but the bottom line is you got to execute. You got to get stuff done. And the other sign I have on the other wall says, I'll figure it out. And that becomes the adapting part. So you got a problem, you have to figure it out, and you have to move forward. So with about 4 minutes left, I don't know if we have any questions. Um, that's that's the story of that particular year, and we learned a lot from that. We learned a number of lessons. Because listen, on this, I do a forecast, a 3-year forecast for the shareholders, and it's not. I'm going to go in and tell them it's not even about, like, why are you asking me for a 3-year forecast? A better question would be, what's your 60-day forecast? What's your 90-day plan? What's your 1-year plan? Not a 3-year plan, because and I'm tired of the excuses of how the world is and how business has changed after COVID. That's no longer an excuse. Things have changed to some degree, but you adapt, and you move forward. So business changes so fast. I look back at some of the decisions I made 2 months ago, and like, they don't even apply now. It's like they're history. They don't mean anything right now. So artificial intelligence is one way that I've drastically changed the business. I mean, drastically. So you have to figure things out pretty quickly, and you have to move fast. So that's our story.
Thank you, Bang. I always, I have not heard that story from you in person. I've only heard it. I worked at Southern for a period of time, and it was, something spoken very highly of there. And Garrett has talked about it as well, but it was certainly a better experience hearing it from you personally. And I just really appreciate it. And I think that it's something that everyone can learn from. So I'm not sure if we have any questions now. So maybe we'll save questions for at the end. And I'll hand it over to Jennifer Clement from CLA.
Thanks, Victoria. Bing, I love your story. It came off like a TED Talk. Just what a great odyssey from start to finish. One, I wanted to thank you for your almost like you would for my friends who are veterans. Want to thank you for your service to our country and to the state in particular. What an amazing adaptation, to use your word. I love that, instead of a pivot. And how resilient you are and your business is since, and the changes that you've made to adapt to the times. I mean, incredible story. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's very
Yeah, and kind of as a segue into this next discussion, being you're welcome to stay. I welcome you to sprinkle in
Of
questions.
course.
I'm sure you're seeing some interesting developments from as your strategy comes together around this issue as well. But you mentioned forecasting, spot on. It's really difficult in this environment where we don't have predictability from a planning perspective. And so for a lot of clients, CapEx is frozen. We don't know, for anybody who's got international supply chain work that they're doing, both on the supply and the demand side, we're living in an environment with variable inputs and variable outputs. And so that makes it really difficult to plan, right? So we have to plan for variability in the next few months. And if we think about 2018 to 20, so let me back up. So my background at CLA is I've been at the firm about 3 years. And prior to that, for 6.5 years, I worked for a company in Asia, living in China for 4 years, from 2015 to 19. I came home right before COVID. And so I lived through Trump 1, tariff round 1, where we help clients develop strategies for reducing their risk and exposure related to tariff. The numbers came at us for about 24 months before we saw stability. And I'll show you a chart in a second and what that means. But what I learned and was to, like, as you described, Bing, is to really help clients adapt to an environment with highly variable inputs, because at any given moment, we didn't know what our inventory was valued at, since we didn't know if tariff was changing on the water or not. So, hand over heart, having lived through this with Trump administration round 1, tariff changes round 1, that playbook is now it's very meaningful for people as we think about controlling what we can control and building a tariff strategy for this next round. So I'm going to dive right in. Let's see, there we go. All right, so first, tariffs are a team sport. This is our typical disclaimer slide, but tariffs are very much of a team sport. And so what I'll offer here may change in the moment of a tweet. And we certainly recommend, on any team that's talking about tariffs, to have good legal input, to have a good customs broker that you trust, to really consult with at any given time, since this is a space that's changing very, very quickly. The news from the Hill, I want to kick off with this, is what we're seeing in terms of changes, and I'll get into the numbers in a second. One big beautiful bill is currently moving through DC at this time. At 1 a.m. this morning, they resumed negotiations. So as we speak, I'm waiting for I'm anxious to get off this call so I can see what updates were in the last half hour, an hour, and we are seeing some pretty dramatic changes to how tax policy, and specifically business tax policy, may be reshaped as we work through this bill, and as it potentially moves to the Senate at the end as early as by the end of the week. But we're seeing, so for families, impacts on business credits are all coming. From a trade perspective, we've also got updates happening from India, from China, from other markets. We just had the UK announcement. Certainly the big announcement last week came from China. Then we're in a 90-day pause period, and clients ask me all the time, should I take a wait and see strategy? And I think about, listening to what happened during COVID for your business. If if we're in a 90-day pause, yes, but if we knew that we had 90 days, and with hindsight, we knew a worldwide pandemic was coming. With hindsight, what would we have done differently? Wouldn't we have taken time to really plan and scenario plan for the business? If tariff rates are 10%, this is how we're going to manage the business. If they're 30%, this is how we're going to manage the business. If they're 145%, this is how we manage the business. We have an amazing opportunity during this 90-day period to really plan and figure out what our strategy is going to be, depending on what these variable inputs to our business look like. So with respect to all countries, yes, 10% is our operating reality, and then it's geography specific. So China went last week on the 14th from 145 down to 30 plus 25 if you're subject to 232 plus 25%. So that this is kind of the current environment that we're operating in, but I encourage people to really use this 90-day pause before we see different numbers bounce in July. That we've got an opportunity to plan and think about what the impact of variability is going to look on the business. Just with respect to China, for perspective, tariffs stabilized. So we saw some volatility, as I mentioned, between 2018 and 20. The numbers stabilized at the end of 20. And so we were living with around 22% or so right up until January. Bounced up to 145. We're back down to 30. And so, but overall, for perspective, we're still up 40% compared to where we were in January. So that's a pretty significant change for a lot of businesses who are depending on a China supply chain. So what we're recommending is really thinking about, first, about a third of the questions I typically get are what tariffs apply to a business. We've got tools to figure that out by HTS code. But to divide our strategy for mitigating risk into 3 buckets. Things we can do immediately, things we can do in the next 12 months with our current footprint, and things we can do to evolve our supply chain strategy over the course of the next 24 months. And I'm going to step through these one by one with different examples of what I'm seeing and the work that we're doing with clients. So you can kind of get a feel for some of the different, you mentioned execution being so important. What are the things that we can do right now, especially in bucket 1, that are immediate, regardless of what the rates are, right? So whether they're 10% or 30% or 145%, what can we do, good tariff hygiene, if you will, to make sure that we're not paying a nickel more than we have to? Bing, any comments for that preamble before we get into this?
No, I think you're covering it very well. I think I will have some questions for you at the end for sure.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. So this is gonna be a round robin of a few things. This one comes out of bucket 1. There's techniques that we can apply, and this gets complex fast. I'm showing it at a very high level it's called invoice splitting. So if I had a client, for example, that is in the med device space, and they're currently doing business with one factory in the EU for years, and they weren't tariffed at all. This came in at 0% forever. And they would get their invoices from the factory every month, amount, date, due, and nobody paid much attention why we weren't tariffed. Well, now they're tariffed 10%. So now it matters, right? The numbers just got bigger. And what they didn't realize is that you can break out certain service costs, if you will, from the product. So you can really scope it down to tariff on cost of goods sold versus services. So things like freight, insurance, certain types of taxes, if there's special international related packaging, if there's special, especially in med device, if there's special fees that are paid to third parties for inspections prior to shipment and so on, those things can all be broken out in a separate service invoice so that we lower that tariffable product amount, if you will. Now, on the right side of this slide, you'll see other things that are dutiable costs. that must be built into cost of goods sold and specifically called out on a customs invoice. So it can, just like tax code, it can get technical quickly, but this is kind of a high level overview of what we look at and how the importance of millions of dollars potentially saved if we can break out some of those service costs in through an invoice splitting strategy. Great bucket one. It's of the 20 ways that we have for reducing exposure. This is one of those items falling in bucket number one. Oops. The other, I sorted these when Victoria and I put together this agenda for you today. I sorted these into the top 10 questions that we ran a 3-part webinar series over the last month, and hundreds of questions came in during that series. And what I'm sharing with you today are the top 10 questions. So what we got asked most often. So I'm hoping that a few of these may be meaningful for folks today, is because this is just based on our experience, what we're hearing more often than not. A bucket 2 strategy is thinking a little bit differently about how goods move around the globe and where we store them before we sell them. So we can implement strategies to bring in goods and not pay customs for a period of time until those goods exit a warehouse. Meaningful work can be done to goods while in this zone, if you will. There's applications required, there's paperwork required, different types of warehousing strategies. There's bonded warehouses, a free trade zone, which is typically in international soil near airports, near ports and so forth. Or there's foreign trade zones, which are based here in the US. So we've helped clients set up foreign trade zones here in the US, which allows you to bring in goods. There's different levels of foreign trade zones. So some you can process and do assembly, sub-assemblies, manufacturing work. Other levels where you're just bringing in the goods, you're storing them for a certain period of time and you're moving them out. But you can sort, you can do inspections, you can do a little bit of service work on them, provided you have the ERP system to handle and the software available to handle the quarantining of the goods, which are split for immediate domestic consumption or re-export. You can delay payments, a cash flow opportunity to delay payment. So, and I won't owe duties until the goods exit my warehouse. You can use the 4 walls of your existing facility to do this. So that's another very creative way. You're not reducing the tariffable amount, but you're deferring the payment and seeing a cash flow opportunity. Very similar to a warehousing strategy is a bucket 1 item, duty drawback. So this is it's been around a long time. It's been around since 1789, and it allows up to 99% of the tariffable amount to be reimbursed if the goods are either subject to re-export or to be destroyed, or under other, there's a couple of other conditions if I'm just repairing and then moving them out and so on. Your ERP system needs to be set up to handle this. So for example, if I have let's say I'm a consumer goods manufacturer and I have a complex assembly, and say 20% of the parts are coming in from international markets, and I then finish my assembly in the US, and then I re-export that product, say to another international market, but 50% of what we make here in the US gets exported. So we're super dependent in the US on our international customers as an industry. And so what duty drawback allows is I can then apply for a refund on the tariff I paid for those inbound goods, so that 20% of those components that went into my finished good. I can apply for a refund on those components since I was tariff on them, but I'm re-exporting, so I can achieve some relief. The typical thing we run into is making sure that an ERP system is set up to handle it. There are certain exceptions for 232. So items that have a significant aluminum or steel content may not be eligible for a duty drawback. So again, the devil, as with all of this, the devil is in the details. For anything that we're doing related to tariff, just like with, when the auditors get involved with a business, we need to make sure we can document and defend any changes that we make and be ready to defend them in court if needed. This is another interesting one. It's Chapter 98. These are a list of exceptions of goods coming into the US market that aren't subject to duty. So anything coming in for military use, something under the Nairobi Protocol, which involves any consumables that are then used by handicapped individuals. So hearing aids, for example, may apply underneath that exemption. There's also items that, if they're intended for use within an agricultural market or production, that are also come in duty free. If a tip, temporary importation under bond, I can bring them in, I can store them for a smaller period of time, similar to our warehousing strategy we were talking about earlier, and re-exporting them. Those may also be Chapter 98 applicable. So if items are donated for charity, same thing. So we've seen a lot of benefit with some interesting opportunities related to goods that may fall in any of these buckets, not tariffed. I get asked all the time, well, hey, Jennifer, what if we just change the HTS code and go for a different code classification? This has to be done very, very, very carefully, because just like in the tax world, if you change a fact pattern, that will be, raise red flags for additional scrutiny. And recently the government put AI engines over Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP. That's the agency that is, when goods come in, they're responsible for customs clearance. And CBP is now using AI engines as of a week and a half ago to look for inconsistencies. So if you're bringing in goods of a certain type, they're making sure that your competition is bringing in goods of the same type under the same code. So if all your competitors are using one code and you're using a flyball different code, AI engines are now going to be flagging that. And the government has a 5-year look back period. So they can look at your records and potentially collect tariff you should have been paying, plus fines and other things, unless you proactively self-report if you potentially see a problem. So changing HTS codes certainly is an opportunity, but something that should be done under super careful guidance and in thinking about what the implication is on a market. Really famous, there's another opportunity here in bucket 2 called tariff engineering, and it's related, so it means change to an HTS code about modifying the design of a product. We did a ton of this in 2018 to 20 by changing the material that goes into an assembly can dramatically change its coding classification. So famous case in 15, when Converse changed the bottom of its shoe from a rubber bottom to a fuzzy bottom. I don't know why anyone would wear those. I'd be falling on my behind, quite frankly. But that then changed the tariffable rate from 20% down to 6% and reaped millions of dollars of savings for that company. This was a famous case. It was actually defended in court and they won. And so it is an opportunity, but to make engineering changes to a product obviously have all kinds of implications on material and supply chain and tooling and other costs that are involved. So this is definitely a longer term strategy, but it's certainly one that's possible. I also get asked frequently about, okay, can I just route my goods through a different country before they are inbound to the US? You can do that as long as transformation is achieved. So if I move the goods into Canada first and then bring them into the US, we have to create a change in product classification and a change in HS or HTS. HS is international, HTS is local. And an HTS code so that as soon as that good is inbound, it's in effect a different good. So if I brought in pieces and parts to Canada and I assembled them into a finished good, I've completely changed the HTS code. I've processed these raw materials into a different product. Same as with everything else, be ready to document and defend it. A lot of clients ask, hey, you know, what about a reshoring opportunity? Should we be thinking about change or a dramatic change in country of origin, which is really, there's a lot of opportunity, you know, amidst the headlines and the issues with and super huge concerns that businesses have with their variable input costs, variable output costs, the business modeling that we're doing with clients to make sure they're scenario planning correctly. A lot of clients are seeing opportunity. Why? Because their end customers may be saying, hey, we want all country of origin to be US and all domestic sourcing. In which case, there's state by state by state, and Connecticut has very attractive incentives and credits available. So if you're planning on hiring staff or expanding your building or doing certain types of training for your staff, all of these things can be eligible for credit and incentives. If you're experiencing a demand situation of strong and increased demand, as you're putting together a business case for a reshoring strategy, one thing to keep in mind is there are lots of credits and incentives out there as you think about the impact and how you want to expand the business. So as I mentioned, here's the big menu. There's about 20 different tariff exposure reduction opportunities. We've gone through a little more than half a dozen this afternoon, just really scratching the surface on the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot more that could be covered in a conversation like this one at a very intimate detail. I get it. This can feel super overwhelming. So hold on, one back. Okay, there we go. So what we recommend doing is taking this one bite at a time and really start with an overall impact assessment to the business, and understanding what are, again, scenario planning. If tariffs are this level, here's how I'm going to structure the business, this level, and so on. So it's exactly what Bing was talking about, is how is the business going to adapt in this world of variable inputs and outputs on the demand side. And then secondly is building a short-term roadmap. So segmenting everything into our 3 buckets. Bucket 1, tariff hygiene. How can we roll up our sleeves, scrub things at the transactional level to make sure we're not paying a nickel more than we have to, regardless of what the tariff rates are. Bucket 2, our current footprint. How can we rethink how goods move around? Can we do a little tariff engineering in order to adapt within the next 12 to 24 months? And then board strategy level conversation in bucket 3. How should we be reimagining our supply chain? Do we have a long-term play to bring business back stateside? And what should that look like? Or do we instead of bringing in full assemblies from international markets, do we bring in pieces and parts? And industry by industry, the answer changes, but it's something that clients are taking an active look at. And does it make sense to? And importantly, is the labor available? And if not, what digital strategy should I be thinking about? Bing mentioned AI and how important it's been for transforming his business. Labor is a big part of that conversation, because whatever we do to reimagine, we've got to make sure we've got proper automation in place so that it balances the needs of, for us on execution, certainly if we're in a tight labor environment. So I think that's a full tour of what we're seeing and what we're hearing. I've got plenty of time for questions. That was a very, very quick snapshot. Open up to the floor to you all. I invite you to join the conversation. And what are you hearing, and what's on your mind, and what are you seeing as effective adaptation at this time?
Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. So much information. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for either Jennifer or Bing? you can feel free to raise your hand or put them in the Q&A section of the chat. Bing, I think you said that you might have some questions for Jennifer.
Yeah, so Jennifer, thanks. I mean, that's holy cow, it's pretty complex stuff. But like you said, and like I would do, is you can't learn all that and implement all that at one time. You have to take it one by one in bits and pieces how it affects the business. From a smaller scale, I can tell you a couple of things of how we've defended ourselves against all of that. So we only import one product. It comes in from Germany. It's a major product. It's used for medical implants inside the body,
Okay.
cranial and spine surgery. So far, that hasn't been an issue. What has been an issue overall, though, is that since the tariffs basically started, they've all raised their prices
Sure.
and considerably. So, now we have to what? We have to recover that money. We have to pass that cost along to, our customers. And, whether it's defense and aerospace or semiconductor or, medical grade plastic, life sciences, they've all got the price increases. And in some cases, it's, 15, 20, 30%. So that could be a long-term effect because, when suppliers raise prices like that, are they really going to come down in price when a lot of this stuff starts to end? Probably not. Maybe one will start the process and the others will join in. But I think to a large extent, those prices are going to remain high. So I hope the strategy works. I personally think that it will. But what we also did prior to that, a business doesn't survive without customers. So we had to protect the customers. We had to adapt. So what we did is we raised our inventory levels prior to all of this really going into effect. So we went from a $5 million inventory. I think we're at $12 million inventory right now. So we have the material on the floor at the old prices. We
Sure.
told our customers, obviously this was happening. Please, issue blanket orders that, cover you for a year. And then we go back to our suppliers and negotiate that because our business is built on volume, as is theirs. They agreed to hold the older prices. So we've got, our biggest customers protected for at least a year at the former pricing. So just a couple of other things that we've done, but got to move fast. You got to be thinking, really quickly and implementing very quickly. And so that's one of the things we did. And in the end, it's serving us well. Inventory is a carrying cost, so I've got to recover that to some extent because, basically you're outlaying money and you're not getting that money back until the product sells. So the turnover of the inventory is a little bit longer. So you have problems, and you got to figure them out. And, I think we've done a decent job in doing that. But at some point, it's going to get better or it's going to get worse. And I think it's going to affect different industries, and some in very bad ways and some that, really won't feel too much effect from it.
Bing, I'm so glad you mentioned the value, the importance of really strong relationships with customers and suppliers. We covered that at length, and the QR code leads you to the 3-part series. Webinar number 1, we spent over half the webinar talking on exactly that subject. And it's about keeping your dollars whole and your margins whole by proactively working with customers and suppliers on these volume buys. If your balance sheet can handle it, you've got the working capital to do it, great. It is absolutely a strategy. We've got to rethink how we're managing cost accounting and what our accounting system of record looks like. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of those relationships and those proactive outbound outreaches that you've done. It's hats off to you. Great stuff.
Thank you.
We'll give one more shot for questions.
I want to, Victoria, I know we had a couple of retailers on the, while those are queuing, we had a couple of retailers that had registered today. And I think demand planning now and scenario-based demand planning is a subject for discussion that we're seeing play such a key role in business strategy right now.
Mm.
And, as we just heard this week that, Walmart is, putting forward its price increase. Bing mentioned earlier that, we're at some point, we're going to have to be passing along increases. How do we do that? Do we have that as a surcharge on an invoice? Amazon talked about surcharges that did not get favorable reception from the White House. But do you bake it into cost of goods sold as you're passing that along to customers? There's different ways to manage the increase, different pros and cons with each. And there's also state by state regulation of transparency and pricing that should also be taken into consideration depending on which states that folks on the phone are selling into, if they are a multi-state and from a demand planning perspective. So there's different ways to package that increase that you can keep in mind and think about. And we're seeing that play out. Walmart's going to bake it into pricing. Amazon's going to call it out as a line item. Wanted to mention that for our retailers.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's good to know too. I mean, not just for retailers, but any consumer on this call, I'm sure appreciates that as well. I'm not seeing any questions coming up in the chat, but I just want to thank you both for your time today. Really great stuff. And of course, if anyone has any questions for either of them, you can always email me and I can get the questions over to both of you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for hosting today. And thank you to the chamber. We really, appreciate the opportunity to share a little insight today.
Absolutely. Thank you both, everyone. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you.